please, I'm begging you," the nun cried, but the mountain man pulled her up and was stunned. The mountain was quiet that morning. A thin layer of frost covered the rocky paths, and the wind whispered through the tall pines like it was carrying secrets. The mountain man, a rugged figure with hands hardened by years of work, moved carefully along a narrow trail. He had lived alone for years, far from villages or towns, relying on his knowledge of the land to survive. Hunting, fishing, and knowing where to find clean water were the things that kept him alive. The mountains were his home, and he knew every stone, tree, and hidden path. He had been following the tracks of a deer, hoping to find a meal, when he heard it. At first he thought it was just the wind, but then there was a sound that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was a voice, high-pitched and trembling, calling for help. "Please, someone, help me!" The mountain man froze, listening. He had been alone for so long that hearing a human voice startled him, but he also knew that in the mountains, voices like that usually meant danger. He moved quickly but cautiously, following the sound. The path grew steeper, and the frost made the rocks slippery. His boots slipped a few times, but he kept going, guided by the cries. The voice grew louder, more desperate. Finally, he reached the edge of a cliff, and there she was. A young nun, dressed in her long habit, was clinging to a small rock ledge with one hand. Her other hand was gripping the edge of the cliff, her knuckles white from fear and cold. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with terror. She was trembling, and the cold had already begun to turn her fingers stiff. One slip, one moment of weakness, and she could fall into the deep ravine below. "Please, I'm begging you," she cried, her voice breaking. "Don't let me fall." The mountain man's heart tightened at the sight. He was not used to seeing people in danger, especially someone so vulnerable. But he also knew the mountains well enough to understand how careful he had to be. One wrong move, and he could end up in the same danger. He looked around quickly, trying to find the safest way to reach her. "Stay calm," he shouted. "I'm going to get you." His voice seemed to give her a little strength. She nodded quickly, biting her lip to keep from crying. He could see the frost forming on her habit and the way her teeth chattered from the cold. The wind was harsh here, cutting through every layer of clothing, and he knew she could not hold on much longer. The mountain man took a deep breath and began to carefully make his way down toward her. He moved slowly, placing his boots carefully on the icy rocks, testing each step. When he was close enough, he stretched out a hand. "Grab my hand!" he called. The nun hesitated for a moment, fear almost freezing her in place, but she knew she had no choice. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. The mountain man's grip was strong and steady. He pulled her inch by inch, using his strength and balance to keep both of them safe. Her small body weighed less than he expected, but the fear in her eyes made the task feel heavier. When she was finally on solid ground, she collapsed in relief. Her knees hit the earth, and she leaned against a rock, breathing hard. Her eyes filled with tears, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of safety she felt in his presence. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought I was going to die." The mountain man nodded, keeping his eyes on her. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "Just stay there for a moment. Don't move too fast." He looked her over, noticing the frostbite beginning to form on her fingers and the redness on her cheeks from the cold. She was shivering violently, and he knew she needed warmth immediately. Without saying another word, he gathered some dry wood and kindling from nearby and built a small fire. The flames crackled and grew, sending warmth into the freezing air. He motioned for her to come closer, and she crawled toward it, wrapping her hands around the heat. As she warmed herself, the mountain man kept watch. The mountains were beautiful, but they were also dangerous. Snow could fall without warning, rocks could slip underfoot, and even a strong person could get lost in minutes. He was glad he had arrived when he did. The nun began to tell him her story between shivers and small sobs. She had been traveling to a distant convent to deliver supplies. The journey was long and difficult, especially in the winter months. She had lost her way in the mountains when a sudden storm had forced her off the main trail. She tried to climb down the cliff to get back to the path, but the rocks were icy and treacherous. That's when she had called out for help, not expecting anyone to hear her. The mountain man listened quietly, his expression calm but alert. He was surprised to hear of her journey. Most people avoided these mountains in winter. Very few dared to travel alone. She had shown courage, but also a dangerous naivety. He understood that sometimes bravery came with risk, and luck often played a bigger role than skill. "Why didn't anyone come to help you before?" he asked gently. I don't know," she replied. "I hoped someone would, but I didn't think anyone was out here." Her eyes filled with tears again, but they were not just from fear this time. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and exhaustion. The mountain man nodded. "You're lucky I was here." They sat together by the fire for a while, letting the warmth sink into their bones. The nun wrapped her arms around herself, trying to recover from the cold, while the mountain man kept adding small pieces of wood to the fire to maintain its strength. He offered her some dried meat and water he had carried, which she gratefully accepted. Despite the danger she had faced, there was something remarkable about her. She did not panic completely. She held on until help arrived. Her voice, though frightened, had been clear and strong enough to call out for help. He admired her courage quietly. She was not just a victim. She was someone who had survived against odds most people could not imagine. As the wind howled outside, the mountain man thought about what to do next. The nun could not stay there alone. The storm could return at any moment, and the fire could not keep her warm forever. He decided he would guide her to a safer place, somewhere sheltered from the wind and cold. But he knew the journey would not be easy. The path was steep, the rocks slippery, and the mountain was unforgiving. For now, though, he let her rest. He kept his eyes on the mountains, listening to every sound. The quiet of the wilderness was deceptive. A wrong step, a sudden rock slide, or even a simple miscalculation could be fatal. He knew he had to stay alert, not just for himself, but for her as well. Hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, melting some of the frost, but not enough to make travel safe. The nun had regained some strength, and the fire had warmed her from the cold. She looked at the mountain man with a mixture of gratitude and awe. He had saved her life, and she knew it. You saved me," she said softly. The mountain man nodded, not saying much. Words were not needed. Actions had already spoken louder than anything could. That morning, high in the frozen mountains, a bond began to form between two strangers. One had lived alone for years, and the other had faced a life-threatening challenge. Together, they shared a moment of human connection, one forged in the cold, quiet wilderness. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test their courage, resilience, and trust in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The sun had climbed higher, though its warmth barely reached the icy slopes of the mountain. The wind had calmed slightly, but the chill in the air still made it hard to stay outside for long. The mountain man knew they could not linger in one place for too long. Night would come quickly, and without proper shelter, the nun could fall ill from exposure. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she wobbled on the uneven ground. Her legs were weak from the cold, and her boots, though sturdy, were slippery on the frosted rocks. Step by careful step, he guided her toward a small cave he knew nearby. It was not much, a narrow opening carved into the mountainside, but it was dry and shielded from the wind. Most importantly, it would keep them safe until the sun set. As they moved, the nun clung to him, not just for balance but for reassurance. The mountain man noticed the fear still lingering in her eyes, though it was mixed now with trust. She had survived the cliff, and she knew that he had saved her life, but the mountains could be unpredictable. One misstep and danger could return in an instant. When they reached the cave, he helped her inside and gathered stones to make another small fire. The cave was cramped, but it would hold heat well. As the flames flickered and cast warm light on the rocky walls, the nun sank to her knees, exhausted. She drew her habit closer around her body, trying to retain what little warmth remained. The mountain man watched her quietly. He had lived in these mountains for years, alone and self-sufficient. He knew the importance of silence and observation, of understanding without rushing to speak. But he also knew that in this moment, the nun needed words as much as she needed warmth. "You're safe now," he said gently.
"You don't have to be afraid anymore." She looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. I
don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but filled with emotion. "I thought I was going to die out there. I had no idea anyone would find me. The mountains are dangerous, but sometimes they lead you to the right people. Today, it led you to me." For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of wind outside the cave entrance. The nun had a habit of speaking softly, almost as if she were afraid to disturb the quiet, but her presence was comforting. She radiated a calmness despite her ordeal, and the mountain man felt a strange sense of connection forming. Once she had rested a little, he offered her a small piece of dried meat and some water. She accepted gratefully, nibbling at the food slowly. The cold had dulled her hunger, but her body still needed nourishment. As she ate, she began to tell him more about her journey. She had been traveling from one convent to another to deliver supplies to a community of nuns who were struggling to survive the harsh winter. Her path had been long and dangerous, but she had not expected to face the cliffs and storms of the mountains. The mountain man listened, impressed by her courage and determination. Most people would have turned back long before reaching such treacherous paths, but she had pressed on. She had a purpose, and it had given her the strength to survive until help arrived. He felt a growing respect for her, not just for surviving, but for having the courage to continue her mission despite the danger. "You are very brave," he said finally. "Most people would have given up long before this." She smiled faintly, though exhaustion was still visible in her eyes.
"I had to try," she said.
"There are others counting on me. I couldn't let them down." The mountain man nodded, understanding the sense of responsibility that drove her. In his own way, he had responsibilities too, though they were different. He was responsible for surviving in the mountains, for respecting the land, and for ensuring that he did not make mistakes that could cost him his life. Yet in this small cave, their lives had become intertwined, and for the first time in a long while he felt a need to protect someone other than himself. As the day wore on, he showed her how to stay warm. He pointed out the safest places to sit and how to use the fire efficiently. He demonstrated small techniques he had learned over the years: how to cover her body to conserve heat, how to avoid drafts, and how to prepare simple meals even in difficult conditions. She listened carefully, soaking in every detail. She knew that knowledge like this could save lives, and she was eager to learn. The nun began to ask him questions as well. She wanted to know how he had survived alone for so many years, how he found food, how he built shelters, and how he handled the loneliness. The mountain man answered patiently, sometimes pausing to think before speaking. He told her about the challenges of winter, the dangers of wild animals, and the satisfaction of living in harmony with nature. She listened, fascinated by his experiences, and found herself admiring his skill and resilience. Despite the warmth of the fire and the safety of the cave, the nun could not stop shivering completely. Her body had been exposed to the cold for hours, and the frost had left her weak. The mountain man insisted she keep moving slightly, stretching her arms and legs to restore circulation. He even showed her how to rub her fingers and toes to bring back feeling. The care he showed was not just practical, it was reassuring, and it gave her confidence that she would make it through the ordeal. As the afternoon turned toward evening, the light outside began to fade, and shadows stretched across the rocky walls of the cave. The mountain man knew that soon they would need to think about the next step. They could not stay in the cave indefinitely. The nun needed to continue her journey, and he needed to guide her to a safer path. But for now, they remained by the fire, sharing warmth and stories. The nun began to speak about her life before the mountains. She told him about her convent, the sisters she worked with, and the reasons she had chosen this path. Her words were gentle and thoughtful, and the mountain man listened, realizing that her courage was not just physical, but also spiritual. She had a strength that came from purpose, from believing in something larger than herself. It was a strength that had carried her through danger and now kept her calm in the cave. For the first time in a long while, the mountain man felt a sense of companionship. He had lived alone for so long that human interaction had become rare and sometimes uncomfortable. But with the nun, it felt natural. Their connection was built on mutual respect, trust, and the shared experience of surviving the mountain's dangers. The days slowly faded into night, and the temperature dropped further. The mountain man added more wood to the fire, ensuring that it burned steadily through the night. The nun curled closer to the warmth, finally allowing herself to relax. She had survived the cliff, and now she had survived the cold. She knew the night would still be challenging, but she felt safer with the mountain man by her side. In that small cave, high in the frozen mountains, two strangers had come together through fate and courage. One had been lost and afraid, and the other had found and protected her. The bond that began that morning was growing stronger, built on trust, kindness, and shared survival. They did not know what the next day would bring, but for now, they had warmth, safety, and the comfort of knowing that they were not alone. And so, as the stars appeared in the clear night sky above, they sat together by the fire, two unlikely companions in a vast and dangerous wilderness, each learning from the other and finding hope in the unlikeliest of places. The night in the mountains was quiet but alive with small sounds. The wind whispered through the pines outside, carrying the faint scent of snow and earth. Inside the cave, the nun had finally stopped shivering, her body warmed by the fire and her muscles slowly relaxing. She sat on a small rock near the flames, watching them flicker as if they held some secret to survival. The mountain man kept tending the fire, moving pieces of wood carefully to keep it burning steadily. After a while, he stepped back and took a moment to look at her properly. He had seen her fear earlier, and he had seen her strength, but now, in the quiet of the cave, he could see more. Her face, though pale from the cold, had a calm determination that he had not expected. Her eyes, still wide from earlier fright, carried a spark of courage and intelligence. It was not the beauty of her appearance that caught him off guard. It was the way she carried herself after facing such danger. There was bravery in her posture, in the careful way she moved her hands, and in the quiet steadiness of her breathing. The mountain man felt a mix of respect and surprise. He had seen many people in the mountains, some lost, some reckless, and some terrified. But he had rarely encountered anyone who could face life-threatening danger and still remain composed once safe. This young nun was different. She had endured the cliff, the cold, and the fear, yet she still had control over herself. That was something remarkable. She noticed his gaze and looked up at him.
"Is something wrong?" she asked softly.
He shook his head slowly, a small smile forming. "No, nothing is wrong. I'm just impressed," he said. "You have a courage most people don't." She blushed slightly, a faint smile appearing despite the tiredness. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but I had to keep trying. I couldn't give up." The mountain man nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the ability to act despite fear. He had learned that lesson many times in his life, climbing cliffs, hunting in dangerous conditions, and surviving harsh winters. But seeing it in someone else, especially someone so young and alone, was humbling. For a long while they sat quietly, the fire crackling between them. The nun began to talk again, this time about her convent and the life she had left behind to make this journey. She spoke of the sisters who relied on her, of the challenges they faced, and of the small acts of kindness that made life meaningful. The mountain man listened, feeling a connection he had not expected. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight of purpose that resonated with him. "You sound very dedicated," he said finally. "Not many people would risk so much for others." She smiled softly. "Sometimes helping others is the only thing that makes sense. Life is hard and everyone struggles. If I can make it a little easier for someone else, it's worth it." The mountain man nodded again, thinking about his own life. He had lived alone for years, focused only on survival, and yet he found himself inspired by her words. There was a kind of strength that came from caring for others, a strength different from the one he had learned in the mountains. He felt a strange respect for her, deeper than admiration. He felt moved by the purity of her purpose. As the night grew colder, he added more wood to the fire and motioned for her to sit closer. "You need to keep warm," he said. "The cold can be dangerous, even when you think you're okay." She obeyed, sitting near the flames and wrapping herself tightly in her habit.
He could see her shivering slightly still, and he felt a protective instinct rise in him.
It was not just about saving her from the cliff anymore. It was about keeping her safe in every possible way. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "Not just in surviving, but in facing what comes next. Most people would break under this kind of pressure." She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. I don't feel strong," she admitted. "I feel like I was lucky to survive. It's not luck. Luck might play a part, but courage and determination matter more. You held on when most people would have panicked. That's strength." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. They had begun to form a connection, a silent understanding that grew stronger with every shared story, every glance, every small gesture of care. They were strangers who had become allies, connected by circumstance, danger, and now mutual respect. Hours passed and the fire burned lower, but neither of them moved to leave the warmth. The nun leaned back slightly, resting her head against the rock wall, and the mountain man observed her quietly. He was stunned, not by who she was, but by what she had shown him about human resilience. The way she had survived, the way she had continued despite fear, inspired him. In all his years in the mountains, he had rarely seen such determination combined with humility and kindness. At one point, the nun spoke of her journey ahead. She needed to reach the other convent before supplies ran out. She described the path, the dangers of the remaining cliffs, and the snow-covered trails that would challenge her every step. The mountain man listened carefully, nodding as he imagined the difficult route she would have to take. He realized that she could not go alone, not safely. He would need to guide her, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because he cared about her survival. "Tomorrow," he said slowly, "I'll help you continue your journey. We'll take it step by step. You won't have to face it alone." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of relief and gratitude. You don't have to," she said softly. "I can manage." He shook his head. "No. I've seen what the mountains can do. You'll be safer with me." The nun nodded, understanding that he was right. There was a quiet strength in his voice, a confidence that made her feel secure. She had trusted him once to save her life. Now she would trust him again to guide her. The night deepened, and the stars appeared through the cave's opening, bright and cold against the dark sky. The mountains seemed endless, silent witnesses to their small, fragile presence. Yet in that cave they had created a small world of warmth, trust, and understanding. The mountain man's heart, often closed and cautious, began to feel something unfamiliar. Respect, admiration, and a sense of responsibility mixed together, forming a bond that neither had anticipated. The nun, too, felt a quiet comfort she had not expected. Alone in the mountains, facing danger and uncertainty, she had found someone she could rely on. It was a rare gift, one that brought a sense of hope she had not realized she needed. As the fire burned low and their shadows stretched across the cave walls, they both fell into a peaceful silence. The mountain man stared into the flames, thinking of the journey ahead and the courage he had witnessed. The nun watched him, realizing that she was not just safe because of him, but also because of the lessons she had learned from surviving her ordeal. Courage, trust, and determination had guided her so far, and now, with his help, they would guide her further. In the quiet of the mountains, two strangers shared a moment that neither would forget. One had been lost and afraid, and the other had saved and protected her. But now, as they sat by the fire, the mountain man was stunned by something more profound than the danger they had faced. He was stunned by the strength, resilience, and quiet bravery of the young nun. She had survived the cliffs, endured the cold, and faced her fears, and in doing so, she had revealed a courage that would inspire him for years to come. And so, as the night stretched on and the fire dwindled to glowing embers, the mountain man and the nun remained together, bound by trust, respect, and the shared experience of surviving a day that neither would ever forget. The first light of dawn crept into the cave, soft and pale, cutting through the darkness like gentle fingers. The cold had lessened slightly since the night, but the mountain air was still sharp and biting. The nun had slept fitfully near the fire, her body finally recovering from the exhaustion and cold of the previous day. The mountain man had stayed awake for a while, watching over her, making sure she was safe and warm. His eyes were alert, scanning the cave entrance and the surrounding slopes for any signs of danger. Even after all his years in the mountains, he knew that safety was temporary and fragile. The nun stirred, stretching her arms slowly and blinking as she took in her surroundings. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the cave seemed quieter than it had the night before. She looked at the mountain man, who had been busy gathering dry wood from just outside the cave. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Good morning," he replied, smiling faintly. "Sleep well." She nodded, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Saibai? I think so. It was peaceful after the storm, she said, glancing at the rocks and walls of the cave. Thank you. Again. He shook his head slightly. You don't need to thank me. It's what anyone would do if they could. He paused for a moment, studying her face. But you should know, surviving out here takes more than luck. You have courage, and that's what kept you alive. The nun looked down at her hands, her fingers still a little stiff from the cold. I was scared, she admitted. But I didn't give up. The mountain man nodded. That's what matters. Fear is natural, but giving up, that's what makes things dangerous. You didn't give up. After a few moments, he gestured for her to follow him. We should prepare for the journey ahead, he said. You're not ready to leave the cave yet, but we can get a head start. She rose carefully, leaning on him slightly for support, as they stepped outside. The morning air was sharp but refreshing. The mountains stretched around them, white and cold, their peaks catching the first rays of sunlight. The mountain man showed her the safest way down from the cave, pointing out rocks that could be slippery and small ledges that were hidden by frost. He explained how to place her feet and hands, how to test the snow before stepping, and how to stay balanced even when the ground shifted. She listened carefully, absorbing every word, her trust in him growing with each instruction. They moved slowly, deliberately. Every step was measured, every motion cautious. The mountain man kept glancing at her to make sure she was steady, and she followed his guidance carefully. As they walked, he shared small tips about surviving in the mountains, how to find clean water, how to spot signs of danger from animals, and even simple techniques to keep warm if they were ever caught in a sudden storm. She absorbed it all, realizing that she had more to learn about survival than she had imagined. After a while, they stopped near a small stream running through the rocks. The water was clear and cold, rushing over smooth stones. The mountain man knelt and filled a small container with water, handing it to her. Drink, he said. You need to stay hydrated. Your body has been through a lot. She took it gratefully, sipping slowly. It's cold, she said with a small laugh, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. But it feels clean. It is, he said. Always drink from moving water if you can. Standing water can be dangerous. They continued on, making their way carefully through the narrow paths and rocky slopes. As they walked, the nun began to talk more about her life in the convent, the sisters she worked with, and the mission she had undertaken. She spoke softly, but with determination and pride. The mountain man listened, surprised by how much strength she carried within her. It was not just physical strength, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. She had endured hardships, faced challenges, and still continued her mission with faith and courage.
You inspire me, he said quietly after a pause.
She looked at him, startled.
Me?
How? Because of your courage, your calmness, the way you keep going even when things are difficult, he replied. Most people would have given up long before reaching this point. I don't feel brave. I just keep moving because there's no other choice. The mountain man smiled faintly. That's what courage looks like. It's not always about feeling brave. It's about acting, even when you're afraid. The path grew steeper as they approached a higher ledge. The mountain man took her hand again, guiding her carefully. She trusted him completely, letting him lead the way. Each step required attention, and they paused often to catch their breath. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and small pieces of ice slid off the rocks around them. Yet, despite the danger, there was a sense of teamwork. They were no longer two strangers. They were companions, relying on each other to move safely. When they finally reached a small plateau, they paused to rest. The view was breathtaking. Mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their peaks glistening in the sunlight. The nun looked out over the landscape, feeling both awe and relief. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," the mountain man agreed, "but it's also dangerous. One wrong move, and the mountains can take everything. That's why you need to be careful." She nodded, understanding fully now. Her journey was far from over, and the challenges ahead were still real. But with his guidance, she felt a sense of hope and confidence she had never experienced before. They continued, moving slowly but steadily. Along the way, the mountain man taught her small skills: how to test the snow's thickness before stepping, how to identify paths that would lead them safely down, and how to read the wind to predict weather changes. She learned quickly, her determination clear. She was not just a survivor, she was becoming someone who could handle the mountains on her own. One day, they stopped near a sheltered area, a small natural alcove in the rock where they could rest and eat. The mountain man unpacked some food he had carried, and they shared a simple meal. They talked quietly, exchanging stories and observations. She told him about the sisters at her convent, the lessons she had learned, and the small joys of helping others. He told her about his life in the mountains, the challenges, and the small victories that came from living close to nature. Despite the exhaustion, there was laughter too, soft, gentle, and full of relief. Moments like these, he realized, were rare in his life. He had spent years alone, and human connection was something he had missed more than he had known. The nun brought a sense of warmth and companionship that he had not expected to find in the mountains. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they prepared to continue for a short distance before nightfall. The mountain man looked at her carefully. "You're doing well," he said. "Stronger than you think, but we need to find shelter before it gets dark." She smiled faintly, grateful for his guidance and encouragement. Together they moved slowly down a safer path, the fire from the morning still burning faintly in her memory, warming her from the inside. The mountains stretched endlessly, but for the first time she felt that she was not alone. The day had tested them both, the nun in her resilience and courage, and the mountain man in his patience and care. But together they had made it further than either could have alone. They had formed a bond built on trust, respect, and shared survival. It was a bond that would carry them through the challenges still ahead, and a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, human connection could be a source of strength, warmth, and hope. And so, as the light began to fade and the first hints of evening touched the mountain peaks, they found a small, sheltered area for the night. The nun curled near the fire while the mountain man kept watch. Their journey was far from over, but together they had faced the mountain's dangers and learned from each other. In that moment, both felt a quiet sense of peace and readiness for the challenges the next day would bring. The morning arrived quietly in the mountains, with a pale golden light spilling over the snow-covered peaks. The nun had slept well for the first time in 2 nights, her body finally recovering from the cold and exhaustion. The fire they had built burned low, but it gave enough warmth to start the day. The mountain man was already awake, tending to the fire and gathering some small supplies for the journey ahead. The nun stirred and stretched carefully, feeling stronger and more alert than she had in days. She looked around at the mountain landscape and felt a mixture of awe and determination. Today she would continue her journey to deliver the supplies to the distant convent, but this time she would not be alone. The mountain man would guide her, and with his help, she felt ready to face the remaining challenges. "Good morning," he said quietly, noticing her wakefulness. His voice was calm, steady, and reassuring. Ready to continue? She nodded, adjusting her habit and straightening her posture. Yes, I think I can manage today with your help. They moved carefully out of the shelter and onto the mountain path. The air was crisp, and the snow glimmered under the early sunlight. The mountain man led the way, pointing out rocks covered in frost and narrow paths that could be dangerous if taken incorrectly. He explained each step and encouraged her to move slowly and steadily, teaching her how to balance and watch her footing. As they walked, the nun began to feel the lessons from the previous days take hold. She remembered how he had taught her to test the snow before stepping, and how to move when the slope was steep. She could feel her body becoming more confident, more sure of each step. The fear she had felt before was still there, but it had diminished, replaced by focus and determination. They stopped for a moment on a small plateau overlooking a valley below. The view was breathtaking. Mountains stretched endlessly, their peaks covered with fresh snow, and a river snaked through the valley, reflecting the sunlight like a silver ribbon. The nun took a deep breath, feeling both peace and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, turning to him. "I couldn't have made it this far without you." The mountain man nodded, giving her a small smile. "You did most of the work yourself," he said. "I just guided you. You had the courage to keep moving when most people would have given up." She smiled faintly, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. "I suppose I did," she said, "but I still have a long way to go."
Yes, but today you'll be stronger. You know more, and you've learned to trust yourself as well as others.
"That makes all the difference." They continued down the mountain, moving slowly but steadily. The path was challenging with sharp rocks and icy patches, but the nun now felt more confident with each step. The mountain man stayed close, offering guidance when needed, but letting her navigate difficult spots herself. It was a careful balance of support and independence, teaching her to rely on her own abilities while still benefiting from his experience. During a brief rest, they sat on a rock near a small stream. The nun filled a container with fresh water and drank slowly, savoring the cool taste. The mountain man watched her quietly, feeling a sense of satisfaction. She had grown stronger and more composed, her fear replaced with focus and courage. He realized that this journey had changed both of them. She had learned to survive in the mountains, and he had learned the value of human connection after so many years of solitude. As the day progressed, the path became less steep, and the snow began to thin in places. The nun could see the distant forest below, a sign that they were nearing safer terrain. She felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Her mission was still not complete, but the hardest part of her journey was behind her. The mountain man led her carefully through the remaining slopes, teaching her small skills as they went. He showed her how to identify safe rocks to step on, how to avoid slippery patches, and even how to use small branches to balance herself. She listened intently, practicing each technique as they moved. By the end of the morning, she could move with more confidence than she had ever imagined. At midday, they stopped in a small clearing surrounded by trees. The sunlight filtered through the branches, warming the ground and melting some of the frost. They rested, eating a simple meal of dried bread and water. The nun looked at the mountain man with admiration. He had not only saved her life, but had also taught her how to survive and navigate the mountains. She felt deeply grateful. "You've done so much for me," she said softly. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." He shook his head, smiling faintly. "No need for repayment. Just continue your journey safely and remember what you've learned. That's enough." The nun nodded, understanding. The lessons he had taught her were more valuable than any gift. They were tools for survival, courage, and resilience. She felt a deep respect for him, not just for his strength, but for his wisdom and kindness. As the afternoon light began to fade, they reached the edge of a dense forest. The path down from the mountains was less treacherous now, and the nun could see the distant outline of a village. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey was nearing its goal, and she knew that the supplies she carried would soon reach the convent. The mountain man guided her carefully through the forest, pointing out roots and uneven ground that could trip her. She moved with confidence now, no longer fearful but alert and prepared. She realized that she had learned more in these few days than she had ever imagined. Skills, patience, courage, and trust. Finally, as the sun began to sink below the horizon, they reached a small, safe clearing where the nun could rest before continuing the final stretch to the convent. She turned to the mountain man, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I can continue from here," she said. "I think I can make it safely now."
He nodded, a faint smile on his face.
"I know you can."
You've learned enough to trust yourself. Just remember everything I've shown you, and take your time.
The nun paused, then took a small step closer to him. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. He nodded, feeling a sense of pride and satisfaction. "Take care of yourself," he said. "And remember, courage and carefulness can get you through anything." With that, she began the final stretch of her journey. The forest surrounded her now, and the distant convent was within reach. She moved steadily, using the skills she had learned and the confidence she had gained. Every step reminded her of the mountain man who had saved her life, guided her, and taught her to survive. As she disappeared into the trees, he watched silently, feeling a sense of accomplishment and quiet joy. He had helped someone in need, and in the process, he had formed a bond that would stay with him forever. The mountains, once lonely and cold, now felt full of life and connection. The sun set, casting long shadows across the forest and mountains. The nun's journey continued, but she was no longer afraid. She had survived the cliffs, the cold, and the fear, and she had learned the value of courage, trust, and human kindness. The mountain man returned to his cabin knowing that he had made a real difference in someone's life, and that their paths, though separate now, would always be connected by the experience they had shared. In the quiet of the mountains, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. The fire had burned low, the snow reflected the fading light, and the wind whispered softly through the pines. Two lives had intersected in an extraordinary way, leaving both forever changed. The nun had gained courage and skill, and the mountain man had discovered the warmth of human connection. Their story was one of survival, trust, and compassion, a reminder that even in the harshest and most dangerous places, courage and kindness can create hope and strength that lasts a lifetime.